From historic Seminary Ridge in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, this is The Seminary Explores. Conversations about people, politics, theology, and life with your host, Dr. Kristen Johnston-Largen.
This is Kristen Johnston-Largen here with Seminary Explorers with my guest, Ted Peters, a distinguished faculty member at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and the Graduate Theological Union. Ted has been here with us during Spring Academy Week, and we were fortunate enough to be able to hear him speak on sin boldly and justification and justice and the life of beatitude. And so I've asked him if he would just talk a little bit more about that with us here. And so welcome, Ted. It's great to have you.
Kristen, it's good to be back here with you and to be once again with the editor of Dialogue. Not just reading what you think, but hearing what you think.
That's right. Spoken as the former editor of Dialogue. I should tell our listeners, Ted, that you are my Dr. Vater. So we have a long and fruitful association, and it's really been fun for me to have you here and be able to sort of share a stage with you. So, well, I thought I'd start our conversation out by asking you just about the title of your forthcoming book, Sin Boldly. This is a Lutheran slogan that I think gets thrown around. We all think it's funny when we hear it. But I think you mean it in a kind of a literal sense, and would like to hear what it means for you and why you think it's even important.
Sin boldly, most people in our society never even heard of Martin Luther. They heard of Martin Luther King, but who's this other guy? And those who did hear of Martin Luther, the one thing they remember, he's the guy who said, right. Sin boldly. And so what's the matter with those Lutherans? I think it has two meanings. And one of them is the common sense meaning that so much of your and my moral life is ambiguous in character. It's hard to do anything that is purely good, that doesn't have a downside or bad side effects or something like that. So we have to make moral decisions in gray areas and choose what's better from what's worse rather than choosing what's really right from what's really wrong. And so some moral decisions means you just have to plunge forward, and maybe somebody's going to be hurt or something like that, but you just have to do it. So I think that's one form of sin boldly, and I think Luther had that in mind. The other is a uniquely Christian understanding, and that is that if you and I have been justified by God's grace and that our relationship is taken care of by God's act in Jesus Christ, then we live by faith. And if we were to try to be good, try to do things right, try to make ourselves virtuous or something of that nature, it would be sort of an insult to the God who has given us all things. And so proceed by sinning boldly, I think, is almost a humorous way of saying we have to take some action in this world, use your best judgment, but don't do it because you want to make yourself a better person. Do it because the neighbor needs something, and you need to love the neighbor and choose it for that reason. So I think that's the second meaning. And when Luther said sin boldly, he said, but even more boldly, proclaim the gospel, live the life of love. Right. Those are the things.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I'm always really struck by the distinction, and you talked about that so much this morning and in your forthcoming book, between self-justification and God's justification, God's justice and our justice too. And it's just, this to me is the power of Lutheran theology, right? I mean, there are wonderful theological traditions in the whole Christian ecumenical church, but for me, the gift, the thing that Lutherans tend for the sake of the whole church is the emphasis on God doing the work of making us righteous. And that goes so counter, right, to everything we want to do all the time. And that, and how freeing it is. That's the boldly part, I think, that I really love is that, and you talk about this in the book, when we rely on God's justification, we're free to make mistakes, right? We're free to screw up, and then we can come with no shame and with no guilt and say, I'm sorry. I can say it to you when I've hurt you. I can say it to God, and there's no, it doesn't affect my status. It doesn't affect my righteousness. And it's just, just personally, I find it unbelievably freeing. And theologically, of course, it's extraordinarily profound.
I think you say it extremely well. It's freeing because we have a prior relationship, in this case, a prior relationship with God. So if we make a bad judgment, or slip or slide or backslide or whatever, right, the relationship is not broken because that relationship is maintained by God, by placing Jesus Christ present, in our faith. Yeah, that's what should make you bold. You don't have to worry about what God thinks about you.
Right.
And I think when I talk about self-justification, I also want to say we don't have to worry what other people think about us either.
Right. Well, that's hard.
Yes. Oh, it is. Well,
I want other people to like me, Ted.
I want other people to like me too. And I was thinking today about the difference between Jesus and you and me.
Oh,
yes.
Just the few small
few small differences. Remember, Jesus took a coin on one occasion and saw Caesar's the face of Caesar on it, and says, "Give to Caesar what is his, and give to God what is God's." I think you and I, we live in the world of Caesar.
Yeah.
That is to say, as professional people, we have a certain influence. We have groups that we're responsible to and answerable to. Presidents of corporations are like that. Political leaders are like that. They have to maintain community. They have to maintain an organization. They are engaged in self-justification all day long, because if they didn't do that, nobody would follow their leadership. I think Jesus simply said to himself, I'm not like Caesar. I'm not going to be the chief executive officer of a seminary. I'm not going to be in the military. I'm going to do one and only one thing, and that has to do with God. And so he chose the other side of the coin, so to speak. So Jesus did not routinely self-justify.
Right.
He wasn't out there to make himself popular. I just wonder what might have happened in some of those private conversations with his disciples. He did have to have an organization, right? And he probably said, well, it's better to do this than to do that. But in any large sense, no, Jesus did not engage in self-justification.
Right.
You and I probably need to do it in order to get along, and maybe that's where sin boldly comes along. If you recognize that you're bragging about yourself, trying to impress other people, have them feel good about you. I don't know, can you chuckle just before you go to bed and say, I did it again today?
Right.
So it seems to me there's a certain inevitability about you and my self-justification.
Right.
And even though I want to say we're freed from it, at the same time, I have a hunch that when we do it, well, we're just going to have to laugh and say this is another example of sinning boldly.
Right. Well, except, I mean, I think I totally agree with all of that. But, of course, the really demonic piece of it, right, is then when as part of our own self-justification, we demonize others. And this is your scapegoating piece that is just, you have been, you and I share an interest in soteriology, right, and talking about salvation. And one of the your own theories that you have relying on Girard, but you've explicated really well, is this idea of Jesus as a scapegoat. And I again, for those who were here and heard you talk about both the visible and the invisible scapegoat, I'd like to invite you to say a little bit more about that, because I think that's a really it's, I can chuckle when I go to bed at night when I've sort of pumped myself up a little bit to try to make myself look good, but I should not chuckle when I did that at the expense of like the water cooler talk, right? When by making another person look weaker, so I can, that's the really, I think, dangerous part of it. And you mentioned today, I don't know when this is going to air. We never quite know. But talking about Sterling in the NBA, how that was just this classic scapegoating example, right? That here was this admittedly racist NBA owner who, in the course of 24 hours, was driven out of the NBA, and then the oneness that the Clippers proclaimed after he was gone.
That's right.
So I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that.
Yes. A scapegoat doesn't have to be innocent to function as a scapegoat. Yeah. And it appears that Mr. Sterling was not innocent. Right. But what was hilarious, as you're suggesting, is how everyone, whether you're in the media or in politics or in business or in basketball, you want to get as far away from this guy as you can. Right. So you're not tarnished by his sins. And it looks just like the scapegoat in the book of Leviticus, chapter 16. Right. Heap the sins on Mr. Sterling and drive him out into the wilderness. Right. That's the way human beings behave. Right. And all of us are tempted to do that. And my interpretation of the Adam and Eve story is to draw a line between good and evil and place ourselves on the good side. And in this case, that meant placing Mr. Sterling on the evil side so all the rest of us could look good. I'm afraid that's human nature. Yeah. And in some ways, that applies to the crucifixion of Jesus, that those who put him to death weren't doing evil. Right. They were doing what is just and good and right and maintaining community. And as Caiaphas says in his speech before the Sanhedrin, well, if one of us dies, we can preserve the whole nation. Right. And so one of the things I want to stress, though, is even though self-justification is basically drawing a line between good and evil and putting ourselves on the good side, only in some cases do we do that by putting a scapegoat on the other side in order to gain more leverage. And you can hear the simple form in conversation, well, I've always been in favor of apple pie and motherhood and buying American, and, that's self-justification in the sense of making myself look good. Right. But if I add that, our nation stands for truth and justice and the American way, and those people in that nation over there ruled by some despot, some Hitler-like despot, we got to send our troops over there and capture their oil. We need to eliminate whoever that demonic person is over there, and then pretty soon, the armies are marching, and somebody is getting scapegoated. So we can self-justify harmlessly, or we can self-justify in a way that somebody gets hurt. Yeah.
Well, and you have the striking sentence. I mean, the justice kills. That's so counterintuitive for us, right? Because we want to say justice gives life.
That's right. Justice gives life, but usually, if you're really passionate in your pursuit of justice, just look in the rearview mirror once in a while and see what you left behind.
Yeah. I haven't had time to process this because I just heard it this morning on NPR. I don't know if you had a chance to hear it also, but there was a story that in Oklahoma, I think this was just last night, that they were in the middle, had started to put a prisoner to death, and they had to stop it because something went wrong. It was clear that he was shaking and seizing, and he ended up dying of a massive heart attack. And so there was another prisoner that was condemned to be executed, and they've put that on hold until they can kind of do an investigation. And something about that feels to me like an uncovering of a scapegoating mechanism, and I don't. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I'm just trying to
think out loud about it. I did hear the report too, and I didn't think about it, but there's no doubt that we in our society want to think of ourselves as humane and as compassionate. Yep. And even though we feel it's just to put certain people to death as retribution for their crimes. We don't want to actually have the punishment fit the crime. We want to think of ourselves as compassionate, even if we're putting a murderer to death who himself or herself was not compassionate. And so I think the problem with the chemicals not working was that it made us, the larger society, look like we lacked compassion, that this man had to die of a heart attack instead of a lethal injection. I think that's what's going on, is that we in our modern liberal society want to describe ourselves as a compassionate people, and we still put people to death, but we don't want to change that self-understanding, do we?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Well, and this is, again, for me, this is why this stuff really matters, right? I mean,
it really matters. It matters on an everyday basis, both in you and my individual lives as well as the larger body politic.
Yeah. And so let's transition then as we have about 5 minutes left to then the sort of so what of why this makes a difference when we can let go of our self-justification, recognizing that God justifies us, to the life of beatitude, which is what you kind of you're going to in your argument. Just what does that mean? Talk a little bit about that when we think about that language.
Well, the question I'm asking is, what is it like in a practical way for you to feel and own and be confident that you're justified by God's grace and not because of something that you've accomplished on your own? What does it look like? And my thought is, well, let's take a look at Jesus' Beatitudes. Even though the framework is the Sermon on the Mount, you wonder, is Jesus a new Moses? And some people have interpreted the Beatitudes as his substitute 10 Commandments.
Yeah, right.
Well, when I look at the Beatitudes, they don't look like commandments at all.
Right.
He doesn't say go out and do X, Y, and Z. They're more like descriptions.
Yeah.
And these people have beatitude. These people have makarios. These people are blessed. Well, who's blessed? Well, somebody who hungers and thirsts after justice, and that person, you and I, might not get quenched. We go to our grave reeling with our hand. It's still an unjust society.
Right.
And Jesus says, well, that person is blessed. And frankly, it doesn't look like it, right? I mean, you're feeling frustrated because you want justice in society and it doesn't happen. Or worse, you want revenge and you don't get it, or something like that. And then poor in spirit, meek, you just kind of go through the list. And I want to say, first of all, they're a bit mysterious. But at the same time, I think Jesus is really serious that the future kingdom of God with all of its blessings is fragmentarily present in people who are poor in spirit, or hungering and thirsting after justice, or willing to accept persecution for the sake of Christ, or something like that. And so my answer is, what does life look like once you're confident that you're justified by God in your faith? And the answer is, I'll bet it looks like the life of beatitude.
Yeah. Do you think it works with the Lucan Beatitudes or just the Matthean Beatitudes?
You smoked me out there.
I don't know. I just thought of it. I'm not sure.
I clearly cleave to the Matthean version of it, and Luke, there's a certain lack of profundity there. For example, take the Beatitude, blessed are the poor. In Luke, it's blessed are the poor.
Period.
In Matthew, is blessed are the poor in spirit.
Right.
There's a subtlety in Matthew that isn't there in Luke. And of course we could say, well, maybe they mean two very different things. Or you could say that. Or maybe whatever Jesus said is muddled and they didn't say either one of those things or something like that. Let me just say, I go to Matthew sort of arbitrarily, and if I were to be exegetically honest, I'd have to go read Luke too.
Well, I think, of course, when we think about the life of beatitude, one of the again, appealing and truthful things I think that it points to is when Lutherans understand transformation, we know that it's fragmentary. We know that it's still wrestling with sin, and I think that's a gift, because I think if the church promises transformation and makes it sound like, once you believe in Jesus, nothing's going to go wrong. You're going to be happy. God's going to bless you with wealth and prosperity and happiness. The church can't deliver on that, because, of course, that's not what the promise is, right? And so there's something about when we can confess this image of a life of beatitude that is given to us from the future, breaking in, but is still wrestling in the midst of the brokenness. There's something that is, I think, quite authentic and even hopeful about that, even when it's not fully realized, even when we go to our grave still wrestling. And I find that quite beautiful and profound.
Well, you articulate it very well, and I agree that there is a beauty to that, and I could say somewhat superficially, well, if you're a Lutheran, you have lower stress, right? There's a certain reconciliation that we have with the ambiguities and fragmentary nature of daily life, but that is a blessing of sorts. Because if you're always demanding that things be changed, if you're always demanding that things be transformed, well, you're going to be frustrated when your demands are not met. And Lutherans can be accused of quietism, which I think is a big mistake. Nevertheless, there's a sense in which we ought to have some sort of peace in mind as we pursue justice in society, as we try to right the wrongs and try to make the world a better place and try to love our neighbor. But we ought to do it with a little bit less stress, because our salvation doesn't depend on it.
Right.
We have both the presence of Christ within us now. We have God's promise for the resurrection, God's promise for the eschatological kingdom, and, what kind of a birthday present would be better than that?
Right. So not only sinning boldly, but just living boldly and gratefully, I think.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're to the end of our time. I can hardly believe it. Ted, it's been so great to have you with us. And
nice to be with you here in Gettysburg.
Yeah, fabulous. All righty. Thank you very much, and wish you all a great day.
You've been listening to The Seminary Explores from historic Seminary Ridge in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a production of the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg. We invite you to visit our website at www.ltsg.edu. All opinions expressed on this program are those of the individual speakers and are not necessarily those of Gettysburg Seminary or the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America.